The rushing waters of Miller's Creek had claimed 3 lives this year, but Maya Rodriguez wasn't about to let it claim a 4th. 8 months pregnant and still riding her Harley despite everyone's warnings, she spotted the man thrashing in the current just as her bike roared across the old steel bridge. Without hesitation, she pulled over and dove in. What Maya didn't know was that the drowning man was Marcus Blackwood, the ruthless CEO whose hostile takeover had bankrupted her family's construction company 5 years ago. The same man whose decisions had cost her father his life savings and her brother his construction crew. The same man she'd sworn to never forgive. But as she dragged his unconscious body to shore and felt for a pulse, Marcus whispered something that stopped her cold. 3 words that revealed a secret about her father's death, a secret that would shatter everything she thought she knew about that terrible day. Now Maya faced an impossible choice: walk away and let karma take its course, or save the man who destroyed her world. But what if saving him meant discovering that everything she believed was a lie? The cold creek water soaked through Maya's leather jacket as she knelt beside the unconscious man on the muddy bank. Her baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if protesting the sudden shock of the icy plunge. She pressed 2 fingers against his neck again, searching for signs of life beneath his expensive suit. His eyelids fluttered open, revealing steel-grey eyes she'd seen once before, in newspaper headlines and court documents that had torn her family apart. Recognition hit her like a physical blow, stealing the breath from her lungs. Marcus Blackwood, the destroyer of dreams, the man who had turned Rodriguez Construction from a thriving family business into bankruptcy papers and broken promises. "The brakes," he whispered, water still streaming from his dark hair. The brakes were cut. Maya's hands froze on his chest. "What did you say?" But his eyes had already rolled back, consciousness slipping away again. She stared at his pale face, her mind racing. The brakes were cut. 3 words that made no sense in the context of a drowning, but perfect sense if he was talking about something else entirely. Her father's accident. The construction site incident that had killed him 2 days after losing everything to Blackwood Industries. Everyone said it was suicide, that Eduardo Rodriguez had been so devastated by the bankruptcy that he'd driven his truck straight into that concrete barrier. But what if it wasn't suicide at all? Maya's hands trembled as she tilted his head back to check his airway. She should call 911. She should perform CPR. She should save his life because that's what decent people did. But 5 years of rage and grief whispered different suggestions in her ear. Let him drown. Let the creek finish what his guilt had started. Justice served cold and final. The baby kicked again, harder this time, and Maya gasped. Her unborn daughter had been moving constantly these past few weeks, as if eager to enter a world Maya wasn't sure she could make safe or fair. What kind of mother would she be if she let a man die while her child grew inside her? What kind of example was that? But what kind of justice was it to save the man who had killed her father? Marcus coughed suddenly, creek water spilling from his lips. His eyes opened again, clearer this time, and focused on her face. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sounds were the rushing water behind them and Maya's labored breathing. "You're pregnant," he said, his voice hoarse. "Observant," Maya replied coldly. Most people would start with, "Thank you." He tried to sit up, wincing as he moved. "Thank you. I mean that. You saved my life. Don't thank me yet." The words came out harder than she'd intended. "I haven't decided if I'm going to keep you alive." Confusion flickered across his features, followed by something that might have been recognition. He studied her face more carefully, taking in her dark eyes and determined jaw, the stubborn set of her shoulders that her father had always said would either make her fortune or get her into trouble. "Rodriguez," he breathed. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. "You remember. Eduardo Rodriguez, Rodriguez Construction." His voice dropped barely above a whisper. "You're his daughter, the daughter of the man you murdered." The accusation hung between them like a blade. Marcus struggled to prop himself up on his elbows, his expensive suit clinging to his frame. I didn't murder anyone. Your father's death was what? An unfortunate coincidence? A tragic accident? Maya's voice rose with each word. 2 days after you destroyed everything he'd built, he drives into a concrete wall, and you want me to believe that's coincidence? The brakes were cut, Marcus repeated, more clearly this time. His grey eyes locked onto hers with desperate intensity. On my car tonight, someone tried to kill me, just like they killed your father. The emergency room's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across Maya's face as she sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair, her wet clothes still clinging to her skin. The paramedics had insisted she get checked out too, concerned about the stress on her pregnancy after her dramatic rescue. She'd reluctantly agreed, knowing Sarah would never forgive her if something happened to the baby. Mrs. Chen? A young nurse approached with a clipboard. The doctor will see you shortly. How are you feeling? Fine, Maya lied, her hand instinctively moving to her rounded belly. The adrenaline was finally wearing off, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion that seemed to seep into her very core. Is he, the man I pulled out, is he okay? The nurse's expression softened. You saved his life. He's stable now thanks to you. Maya nodded, though she wasn't sure why she cared. Maybe it was simply human decency, the basic relief that comes from knowing you haven't watched someone die. She closed her eyes, trying to push away the memory of his lifeless weight in the water, the terrifying seconds when she thought she might be too late. Maya Santos? Her eyes snapped open at the sound of her name spoken in a voice she didn't recognize. A tall woman in an expensive charcoal suit approached, her stilettos clicking against the linoleum floor. Everything about her screamed corporate lawyer, from her perfectly styled blonde hair to her calculating blue eyes. Yes? I'm Victoria Thorne, legal counsel for Sterling Enterprises. The woman extended a manicured hand that Maya pointedly ignored. I understand you were the Good Samaritan who assisted Mr. Sterling today. Sterling. The name hit Maya like a physical blow, stealing the breath from her lungs. It couldn't be. Not after all these years. Not now. Mr. Sterling would like to express his gratitude personally, Victoria continued, seemingly oblivious to Maya's stunned silence. He's asked me to arrange a meeting once he's released. Perhaps we could... No. The word came out sharper than Maya intended. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. No meeting. I don't want anything from him. Victoria's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose. I'm sorry, I don't understand. Mr. Sterling simply wants to thank you properly. There would certainly be a substantial reward for your heroic actions. I said no. Maya's voice carried an edge of steel that made the lawyer take a step back. Tell your boss that Maya Santos wants nothing from him. Nothing at all. Before Victoria could respond, Maya turned and walked toward the exit, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Sterling. After 7 years, fate had delivered him directly into her hands, literally. The irony was so cruel it almost made her laugh. She pushed through the hospital's automatic doors into the cool evening air, grateful for the oxygen that filled her lungs. Her motorcycle sat in the parking lot where the paramedics had left it, gleaming under the sodium lights like a faithful steed waiting for its rider. Maya's hands shook as she pulled out her phone and dialed Sarah's number. Maya, thank God. I heard about the accident on the news. Are you okay? Is the baby... We're fine, Maya interrupted. Sarah, I need to tell you something. The man I pulled out of the water... It was him. It was Alexander Sterling. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that Maya wondered if the call had dropped. Sarah, are you sure? Her sister's voice was barely a whisper. His lawyer just cornered me at the hospital. It's him. Another pause. Then Sarah's voice came back stronger, filled with the same protective fury that had carried them both through their darkest days. What are you going to do? Maya looked back at the hospital, its windows glowing like beacons in the gathering darkness. Somewhere in that building, the man who had destroyed everything they'd built was lying in a bed, alive because of her actions. The man who had crushed their father's company with calculated precision, who had cost them their home, their security, their father's will to live. The man whose life she had just saved. "I don't know," she admitted, her free hand moving to rest on her belly where her daughter grew. "I honestly don't know." As she stood there in the parking lot, the weight of the evening's events settling over her like a heavy cloak, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. 7 years ago, Alexander Sterling had upended her world without a second thought. Now, through some cosmic joke, she held all the cards. The question was, what kind of person did that make her? And more importantly, what kind of person did she want to be for the daughter she was carrying? The answers, she knew, would define everything that came next. The antiseptic smell of the hospital waiting room made Maya's stomach churn, though she couldn't tell if it was morning sickness or the surreal nature of her situation. She sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair, her wet clothes finally beginning to dry, watching nurses bustle past with practiced efficiency. Every few minutes, she caught herself glancing toward the double doors where they'd wheeled him away. Alexander Blackstone. The name had been echoing in her mind for the past hour, like a curse she couldn't shake. She'd pulled the most hated man in her world from the murky depths of the Hudson, breathed life back into his lungs, and now sat here feeling inexplicably responsible for his survival. "Ma'am?" A young nurse approached with a clipboard. "The doctors wanted to thank you. Mr. Blackstone is stable now, thanks to your quick thinking." Maya nodded absently. "Will he be okay?" "He should make a full recovery." "Are you family?" The question caught her off guard. "Oh, I was the one who found him." "Well, he's very lucky you did. The hypothermia could have been fatal if you'd arrived even 10 minutes later." The nurse smiled warmly. "You're a hero." Hero. The word tasted bitter in Maya's mouth. Heroes didn't fantasize about letting someone drown. Heroes didn't stand by a river for those crucial seconds, weighing a stranger's life against their own pain. Her phone buzzed. A text from her mother. "How did the job interview go, sweetheart?" Maya stared at the message, remembering why she'd been on that bridge in the first place. The interview at the marketing firm had been a disaster. 3 months pregnant and desperately needing health insurance, she'd tried to hide her condition, but the interviewer's eyes kept drifting to her midsection with barely concealed suspicion. She'd left knowing they'd never call. Another text. "Dad's physical therapy went well today. His spirits seem better." Maya closed her eyes. Her father's spirits were better because he didn't know about the latest medical bills piling up, or that Maya had been selling her possessions to help cover them. The stroke had stolen more than his mobility. It had taken his pride, his purpose, everything Blackstone Industries had left behind when they crushed Santos Construction like an insect. "Excuse me, are you Maya Santos?" She looked up to find a man in an expensive suit standing before her. Everything about him screamed corporate lawyer, from his perfectly styled hair to his cold, calculating eyes. "I'm James Morrison, Mr. Blackstone's attorney. I understand you're the one who saved his life." Maya stood slowly, instantly on guard. "I helped someone who was drowning. That's all." "Of course." His smile was razor thin. "Mr. Blackstone would like to thank you personally when he's feeling better. Perhaps we could arrange something?" "That's not necessary." "I insist. Mr. Blackstone is very generous to those who help him. I'm sure we could work out some sort of compensation for your heroic actions." The way he said compensation made Maya's skin crawl, as if her choice to save a life was just another transaction to be negotiated, as if everything could be bought and sold. "I don't want his money." Morrison's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Everyone wants something, Miss Santos. Mr. Blackstone has a way of finding out what that is." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Maya felt a chill that had nothing to do with her damp clothes. "I said no." "Perhaps you should think about it." He pulled out a business card. "Your family has been through some difficult times, hasn't it? Your father's medical expenses, your mother's job search, your own condition." His gaze dropped meaningfully to her stomach. Maya's blood turned to ice. "How do you—" "Mr. Blackstone likes to know who his friends are. and who his enemies are. Morrison placed the card on the chair beside her. "I'll be in touch, Miss Santos. Have a wonderful day." He walked away before she could respond, leaving Maya standing alone in the middle of the waiting room with her heart pounding. The business card seemed to mock her from the plastic chair, embossed letters spelling out a name that now felt like a noose tightening around her neck. She grabbed her helmet and jacket, suddenly desperate to escape. At the elevator, she punched the button repeatedly, her hands shaking. The man she'd saved wasn't just Alexander Blackstone. He was a predator who'd already begun circling her family again, using her own good deed as leverage. As the elevator doors opened, Maya made a decision that surprised her with its clarity. She turned and walked toward the information desk instead. "Excuse me," she said to the clerk. "I need to know what room Alexander Blackstone is in." If Blackstone wanted to play games, she'd remind him exactly who held the cards. After all, he owed her his life, and she was going to collect that debt in ways his money could never buy. The clerk smiled helpfully. "Room 314. Are you family?" Maya smiled back, feeling something dark and determined settling in her chest. Something like that. The rain drummed against the hospital windows as Maya sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair, her wet clothes clinging to her skin. The emergency room bustled around her, nurses rushing between curtained areas, the constant beep of machines, the antiseptic smell that made her stomach churn. Or maybe that was just the pregnancy. She should leave. Every rational part of her mind screamed to walk away, to pretend this night had never happened. But something kept her rooted to that chair, watching the controlled chaos of people fighting to save lives, including his. "Ma'am?" A young nurse approached, clipboard in hand. "Are you here for Ethan Cross?" The name hit her like a physical blow. Hearing it spoken aloud made everything real again. The recognition, the fury, the impossible situation she'd stumbled into. Yes. Is he okay? Are you family?" Maya almost laughed at the absurdity. "No, I'm the one who pulled him from the river." The nurse's expression softened. "He's stable. Hypothermia, some water in his lungs, but the doctors think he'll make a full recovery. You saved his life." The words should have brought relief, but instead they twisted in Maya's chest like a knife. She'd saved him. The man who'd destroyed everything her family had built, who'd left her father broken and her mother working double shifts just to keep their heads above water. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd literally kept Ethan Cross from drowning while her own family had been drowning financially for months. "Can I see him?" The nurse hesitated. "He's not conscious yet, but I suppose for a few minutes." Maya followed her through a maze of hallways, her boots squeaking against the polished floor. With each step, her heart hammered harder. What was she doing? What would she even say to him when he woke up? The room was dimmer than the hallway, filled with the soft whoosh of machines monitoring his vitals. Ethan Cross lay motionless in the hospital bed, an oxygen mask covering half his face. Without the expensive suit, without the confident bearing she'd seen in newspaper photos, he looked younger, vulnerable, human. Maya approached the bed slowly, studying the man who'd haunted her family's conversations for the better part of a year. Dark hair still damp from the river, strong jawline marred by a few cuts from his car's shattered window. His breathing was steady now, no longer the desperate gasping she'd witnessed by the water. Her hand moved unconsciously to her belly, where their baby, hers and Jake's, was growing. Jake, who'd lost his job when Cross Industries absorbed their company and eliminated redundancies. Jake, who'd been spiraling ever since, drinking too much and staying out too late, leaving Maya to figure out how they'd afford to raise a child. "Why did you do it?" she whispered to the unconscious man. "We were good people. We worked hard. We didn't deserve what you did to us." Ethan's eyelids fluttered, and for a moment Maya thought he might wake up. Her pulse quickened. What would she do if he opened his eyes right now? Would she tell him who she was? Would she explain that the woman who'd saved him was connected to the lives he'd carelessly destroyed? But his breathing remained steady, and his eyes stayed closed. Maya sank into the visitor's chair, exhaustion finally catching up with her. The adrenaline from the rescue was wearing off, leaving her drained and confused. She'd acted on instinct, diving into that river without thinking. But now, in the quiet of this hospital room, she had to confront the magnitude of what had happened. She could have let him drown. The thought crept into her mind unbidden, and she immediately felt sick for thinking it. But it was there nonetheless. She could have pretended not to see the car go over the guardrail, could have convinced herself she'd imagined the splash. By the time anyone else arrived, it would have been too late. Instead, she'd risked everything, her own life, her baby's life, to save him. "Maya?" The voice from the doorway made her jump. She turned to see Jake standing there, his hair disheveled, worry etched across his features. The hospital called. "They said you were in an accident." She stood quickly, moving away from the bed. "I'm fine. I pulled someone from the river, and they wanted to check me over. Everything's okay with the baby." Jake's eyes moved past her to the figure in the bed, but the distance and medical equipment made identification impossible. "Jesus, Maya, you could have been killed. What were you thinking?" She didn't have an answer for that. She hadn't been thinking, she'd been reacting, following some deeper instinct that overrode logic and self-preservation. "Let's go home," Jake said, taking her arm gently. As they reached the door, Maya glanced back once more at Ethan Cross. Tomorrow he would wake up. Tomorrow he would go back to his billion-dollar empire, probably never knowing who had saved him. But Maya would know. And somehow that changed everything. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, charged with recognition and barely contained fury. Maya's hands trembled as she gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white against the worn leather. Every instinct screamed at her to floor the accelerator and leave him standing there, soaked and shivering in his expensive suit that now clung to his frame like a second skin. But she couldn't move. Alexander Thorne stood frozen beside her truck, water still dripping from his dark hair, his usually commanding presence reduced to something almost vulnerable, almost human. The man who had signed the papers that destroyed everything her family had built was now staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Surprise, yes, but something deeper too, something that looked uncomfortably like guilt. Maya. Her name fell from his lips like a confession, barely audible over the sound of rain beginning to patter against her windshield. Maya Santos. "So you do remember." Her voice came out steadier than she felt, though the baby chose that moment to deliver a particularly sharp kick to her ribs, as if sensing the tension crackling through her body. "I wasn't sure if small businesses like ours even registered on your radar before you crushed them." He flinched at that, actually flinched, and took a half-step closer to the truck. "I remember everything about that acquisition. Every detail." Acquisition. She let out a bitter laugh that tasted like ashes in her mouth. "Is that what you call it when you destroy 3 generations of honest work? When you put 60 people out of jobs right before Christmas?" The rain was coming down harder now, and she watched as he ran a shaking hand through his wet hair. Whether he was shaking from the cold or something else entirely, she couldn't tell, didn't want to care. "Get in," she said suddenly, the words surprising even herself. "Before you catch pneumonia, Maya, I don't think—" "Get in the damn truck, Alexander." The use of his full name felt like drawing a weapon. "We need to talk, and I'm not doing it through a window in the rain." He hesitated for another moment, then walked around to the passenger side. The truck dipped slightly under his weight as he settled into the worn bench seat, and suddenly the cab felt impossibly small. His presence filled the space between them, the scent of lake water and expensive cologne, the sound of his careful breathing, the way he held himself so precisely even now. Maya stared straight ahead at the lake, its surface now choppy with rain. "Why were you trying to drown yourself in there?" "I wasn't—" He stopped, let out a shaky breath. "I fell off the dock, hit my head on the way down, I think. Everything went black." She turned to look at him then, really look at him, and noticed the angry red mark along his temple that would likely bloom into a spectacular bruise. "What were you even doing out here?" This is hardly billionaire territory. Something shifted in his expression, a wall coming down just slightly. I come here to think sometimes. When the city gets too, he gestured vaguely, too much. I never expected to see anyone else, especially not one of your victims? That's not what I was going to say. But it's what you meant. Maya's hand moved instinctively to her belly, where the baby had settled into a restless flutter. 6 months along now, and every day brought new fears about providing for this child, about building something stable from the wreckage he had left behind. The silence stretched again, but this time it felt different, heavier. Alexander was staring down at his hands, clasped tightly in his lap, and when he spoke again, his voice was so quiet, she almost missed it. I know what I took from you, from your family. I know exactly what it cost. Do you? The question came out sharper than she intended. Do you know that my father hasn't been the same since? That he blames himself for not seeing it coming? For not fighting harder? Do you know that my mother cries when she thinks no one's looking? Or that my brother had to drop out of college because we couldn't afford tuition anymore? Each word hit its mark. She could see it in the way his jaw tightened, the way his breathing grew more shallow. Good. She wanted him to hurt the way her family had hurt. And now, she continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper, I'm pregnant and alone, trying to figure out how to raise a child when I can barely keep myself afloat. So yes, Alexander, I'd say you know exactly what you took from us. The rain drummed against the roof of the truck, filling the silence that followed. When Alexander finally looked up at her, his eyes held something she'd never expected to see there. Genuine remorse. And somehow, that made everything infinitely more complicated. The hospital cafeteria hummed with quiet conversations and the clink of silverware against plastic trays. Maya sat across from Alex, her hands wrapped around a cup of lukewarm coffee that had long since lost any appeal. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows under his eyes, making him look older than his 34 years. You don't have to stay, she said for the third time in an hour. I'm sure you have important billionaire things to do. Alex pushed a piece of wilted lettuce around his salad container. Like what? Counting money? Foreclosing on orphanages? The bitterness in his voice surprised her. She studied his profile, noting the tension in his jaw, the way his fingers drummed restlessly against the table. This wasn't the composed corporate predator she'd imagined all these years. Why did you buy Torres Construction's debt? The question slipped out before she could stop it. His hand stilled. You know about that? Hard to forget when it destroyed my family. Maya's voice remained steady, though her heart hammered against her ribs. Carlos Torres was my stepfather. Alex went completely motionless, his fork suspended halfway to his mouth. The color drained from his face as understanding dawned. Maya Santos. You're Elena's daughter. You remember my mother? I remember everything about that acquisition. He set down his fork with deliberate care. Your stepfather came to see me personally, begged me to restructure the loan terms, and you said no. I said no. The admission hung between them like a blade. The company was hemorrhaging money, bad contracts, cost overruns, a lawsuit from the Peterson project that would have bankrupted them anyway. Taking over the debt was supposed to be a mercy. Maya's laugh was hollow. Some mercy. Carlos had a heart attack 3 weeks later. My mother never recovered from losing everything they'd built together. Alex's face crumpled slightly. I didn't know about his heart attack. Why would you? We were just numbers on a spreadsheet. The words tasted bitter, but Maya found herself studying his expression. The guilt there seemed genuine, raw, not what she'd expected. You're right. His voice was barely audible. That's exactly what you were. Numbers, risk assessments, profit margins. He looked up at her, and she was startled to see moisture in his eyes. I've destroyed a lot of families, Maya. Yours was just one of many. The confession should have satisfied her, should have vindicated years of anger. Instead, it left her feeling strangely empty. This broken man across from her bore little resemblance to the monster she'd constructed in her mind. Why are you telling me this? Because you saved my life. Because you're carrying a child and sitting in a hospital cafeteria with the man who helped destroy your family, and I can't figure out why." He leaned forward. "You could have left me in that water. Part of you probably wanted to." Maya's hand instinctively moved to her belly. "I'm not a killer." Neither was I. Or at least, I told myself that. Alex ran a hand through his hair. "Do you know what I was doing at the lake today?" She shook her head. "Planning my suicide." The words fell between them like stones. "I've been planning it for months." The water seemed appropriate somehow, cleaner than pills or a gun. Maya's coffee cup rattled as she set it down too hard. "Why?" "Because I'm tired. Tired of being alone, tired of the guilt, tired of building an empire on other people's ruins." His smile was self-deprecating. "Turns out money can't buy absolution." Who knew? Despite everything, Maya felt a flicker of sympathy. "So what changed your mind?" "You did." He met her eyes directly. "You pulled me out of that water when you had every reason to let me drown. If someone who has every right to hate me can still choose mercy." He trailed off, shrugging. "Don't put that on me," Maya said sharply. "I'm not responsible for your life choices." "No, you're not. But you reminded me that there might be another choice besides destroying or being destroyed." He paused. "What happened to Torres Construction's employees?" "Most found other jobs eventually. Some didn't." Maya's voice was flat. "Mrs. Patterson lost her house. The Gonzalez family had to move in with relatives." Alex pulled out his phone, typing rapidly. "What are their full names?" "Why?" "Because I can't undo the past, but maybe I can stop being a coward about the future." He looked up at her. "Will you help me find them?" Maya stared at him, searching for deception, for some angle she was missing, but his eyes held only exhaustion and something that might have been hope. "This doesn't fix anything," she said finally. "No," he agreed, "but it's a start." The hospital room felt smaller with Marcus standing in it. Elena had been staring at the ceiling for what felt like hours, her mind churning through everything Dr. Chen had told her about the pregnancy complications. The stress of the past few days had taken its toll, and now she was facing the very real possibility of losing the only good thing left in her life. She didn't look at him when he spoke. "The nurses said you haven't eaten anything today." His voice was careful, measured. "I brought some soup from that place down the street, the one with the yellow awning." Elena's head turned sharply toward him. "Giuseppe's. Her father used to take her there every Sunday after church, back when they still had money for small luxuries, back before Marcus Holloway had stripped away everything familiar and safe from her world." "How did you know about that place?" The question came out sharper than she intended. Marcus set the container on the bedside table, his movements deliberate. "I've been doing research about your family, about what my company did to your father's business." He paused, running a hand through his hair. "I know it doesn't change anything, but I needed to understand. Understanding doesn't bring back what you destroyed." Elena's fingers found the edge of her hospital gown, twisting the fabric. "Understanding doesn't pay medical bills or put food on the table." "No, it doesn't." Marcus pulled the visitor's chair closer to her bed, but didn't sit. "Your father was a good man. He employed 47 people. Most of them had been with the company for over a decade. When we acquired his patents and shut down operations, those people lost everything." Elena felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "Not in front of him." 49 people, she corrected quietly. "Dad counted himself and me. I was supposed to take over the business someday." The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of unspoken grief. Outside the hospital window, rain had started falling again, painting streaks down the glass. "I want to make this right," Marcus said finally. "You can't." Elena's voice was barely above a whisper. "My father died believing he was a failure, that he couldn't protect what his own father had built. You can't bring him back. You can't give me back my childhood or the years I spent watching my mother work 3 jobs just to keep our house." Marcus sat down heavily in the chair, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. I know about the baby's father. Elena's breath caught. She hadn't expected that. Jake Morrison. The police report said he was drunk when he hit that family. 3 people died. Marcus's voice was gentle, but the words hit her like physical blows. You never told anyone he was the father, did you? How is that your business? Elena turned away from him, focusing on the rain patterns on the window. Because I understand what it's like to carry that kind of weight alone. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. My brother died in a car accident 5 years ago. Drunk driver hit him head-on. For the longest time I thought I understood senseless loss. But I never considered that someone might be carrying the guilt of loving the person who caused that kind of pain. Elena's hand moved instinctively to her belly. I didn't know what Jake had done when we were together. I found out after he died, after I was already pregnant. The families of his victims, they have every right to hate this baby, to hate me. Do you hate the baby? The question was so simple, so direct, that it cut through all her defenses. No, Elena whispered. I hate that I don't hate Jake. I hate that part of me still misses him, even knowing what he did. I hate that this baby will grow up never knowing their father, but maybe that's better than knowing the truth. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I've been carrying this around for 3 days, trying to figure out if I had the right to give it to you. Elena looked at the paper but didn't take it. What is it? A check. Enough money to cover your medical expenses, the baby's care, and more. Enough to give you choices. He set it on the bedside table next to the soup. I'm not trying to buy forgiveness. I know that's not possible. But I can give you financial security. I can make sure you never have to worry about money again. Elena stared at the folded paper as if it were a snake. What's the catch? No catch. No strings. No contact required. Marcus stood up, smoothing down his jacket. I just need you to know that if you decide you still want revenge, if you want to destroy me the way my company destroyed your family, this doesn't change anything. You still have that power. He walked toward the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. But I hope you'll choose to save us both instead. The morning sun cast long shadows across the hospital parking lot as Maya sat on her motorcycle, helmet in her lap, staring at the building's glass facade. She'd been there for 20 minutes, engine cooling, wrestling with the decision that had kept her awake all night. Inside that building lay Alexander Cross, vulnerable, dependent on her silence, unaware that his savior was the daughter of the man whose life he'd systematically dismantled. The irony wasn't lost on her. She could walk away right now, let him wonder forever who had pulled him from the lake, and return to her quiet life, rebuilding what he'd destroyed. But something had shifted in those desperate moments underwater. She'd seen fear in his eyes, raw, human fear that stripped away all pretense of power and wealth. It was the same fear she'd seen in her father's eyes during those final weeks. Maya's hand instinctively moved to her growing belly. Her baby deserved better than a mother consumed by vengeance. Perhaps it was time to face the ghost that had haunted her family for 3 years. The elevator ride to the 5th floor felt eternal. With each passing floor, her heart hammered harder against her ribs. She'd rehearsed this moment countless times, but now that it was here, every planned word seemed inadequate. The nurse at the station barely looked up as Maya walked past. Room 512 was at the end of the hall, door slightly ajar. Through the gap she could see Alexander propped up in bed, staring out the window at the lake that had nearly claimed his life. Maya knocked softly and pushed the door open. Alexander turned, and for a moment neither spoke. Recognition flickered in his dark eyes, not of her identity, but of her face from his fragmented memories of the rescue. "You came back," he said, his voice hoarse but steady. "I needed to see how you were doing." Maya remained by the door, her escape route clear. "Because of what you did yesterday, I'm alive. Please, come in." She hesitated, then stepped forward, letting the door close behind her. The room suddenly felt smaller, more intimate. "How are you feeling?" Like I've been hit by a freight train, but the doctors say I'll recover fully. His gaze never left her face. I remember pieces, the water, the cold. Your voice telling me to hold on. Maya nodded, unsure how to respond. This wasn't how she'd imagined their first real conversation would go. "I'm Alexander Cross," he said, extending his hand. The moment of truth. She could give a false name, maintain the illusion a little longer. Instead, she found herself saying, "Maya Reeves." His hand froze halfway to hers. The change in his expression was immediate. Surprise, confusion, then a dawning recognition that went beyond their shared trauma in the lake. "Reeves," he repeated slowly. "As in Reeves Construction. David Reeves was my father." The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Alexander's hand dropped to his lap, his face pale. "Your father died 2 years ago. Heart attack brought on by stress." Maya's voice was steady, matter of fact. He never recovered from losing everything. Alexander closed his eyes, and Maya watched as the weight of understanding settled over him. When he opened them again, she saw something she hadn't expected. Genuine anguish. "Maya, I don't." She held up a hand. "Don't apologize. Don't try to explain business decisions. I didn't come here for that." "Then why did you come back? Why did you save me when you knew who I was?" It was the question she'd been asking herself all night. "I didn't know at first. I just saw someone who needed help. But you figured it out. Before you pulled me out, you knew." Maya nodded. "When you said your name in the water." Alexander stared at her with something approaching awe. "You could have let me drown. You had every reason to." "Yes, I did. But you didn't." "Oh, why?" Maya moved closer to the bed, studying his face. The arrogant billionaire from the newspaper photos was gone, replaced by someone genuinely struggling to understand an act of mercy he felt he didn't deserve. "Because my father taught me that we're responsible for our choices, not other people's. Your choices destroyed my family's legacy, but they don't get to define who I am." Alexander's eyes glistened. "Your father sounds like he was a good man." "He was the best man I ever knew." "I'm sorry, Maya. I know that means nothing, but I'm sorry for what my decisions cost your family." She studied his face, searching for deception, for the calculating coldness she'd expected. Instead, she found only regret and a pain that seemed to match her own. "I believe you," she said quietly. Something shifted in the air between them, a small crack in the wall of hurt and anger that had defined her world for so long. Alexander's next words were barely a whisper. "What happens now?" Maya touched her belly, feeling the flutter of life within. "I don't know." The rain hammered against the hospital windows as Maya sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair, her hand resting protectively over her belly. 3 days had passed since she'd pulled Ethan Cross from the river, 3 days of watching him drift in and out of consciousness while battling pneumonia and hypothermia. The doctors said he was lucky to be alive. Lucky. The word tasted bitter in her mouth. She should have left him there in the water, should have ridden away and let the river claim the man who'd destroyed everything her father had built. Instead, here she was, keeping vigil at his bedside like some kind of guardian angel for the devil himself. Ethan stirred, his dark lashes fluttering against pale cheeks. When his eyes finally opened, they found hers immediately, as if he'd sensed her presence even in sleep. "You're still here," he whispered, his voice rough from the breathing tube they'd removed yesterday. "Don't get any ideas. I'm not staying for you." The lie came easier than the truth. She wasn't sure why she'd stayed, why she couldn't bring herself to walk away. He struggled to sit up, wincing as the movement pulled at his 4 lines. "The baby is fine. No thanks to your dramatic rescue." Maya's hand moved unconsciously to her stomach. The baby had been restless since the incident, as if sensing her turmoil. Ethan's relief was visible, his shoulders sagging back against the pillows. "I remember what you said, about your father." His eyes searched her face. Robert Chen. Chen Industries. Maya's blood ran cold. She'd hoped he wouldn't remember, that the trauma and medication would have clouded his memory. So you do remember destroying innocent people? I remember a lot of things differently than you might think. His voice was stronger now, urgent. Maya, I need to tell you something about that acquisition, about what really happened. I don't want to hear your justifications. It wasn't my decision. The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Maya felt her carefully constructed armor of hatred crack slightly. What do you mean? Ethan closed his eyes, as if the memory caused him physical pain. My father. He was dying, and he wanted one last victory. Chen Industries had something he needed, a patent for manufacturing technology that would have revolutionized our production process. I tried to negotiate a partnership, but he wanted complete control. So you just went along with it? Destroyed my father's life's work because Daddy said so? I fought him for months, tried to find another way. Ethan's hands clenched into fists on the white hospital sheets, but he threatened to destroy everything, not just Chen Industries, but every company that had ever worked with your father. He would have made sure Robert never found work anywhere in the industry again. Maya stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the linoleum floor. You expect me to believe you were trying to protect him? By stealing everything he'd built? By making sure he got a fair price and clean exit instead of being blacklisted from the industry entirely? Ethan's eyes blazed with intensity. I made sure your father received triple the market value for his company. I made sure all his employees were offered positions with us or generous severance packages. Money doesn't fix everything. But even as she said it, Maya remembered how her father had seemed almost relieved after the sale, despite his public bitterness. How he'd insisted on paying for her motorcycle, her apartment deposit, even though she'd protested. I know, but it was the best I could do under impossible circumstances. Ethan tried to sit up further, his face contorting with effort. My father died 2 weeks after the acquisition was finalized. I've regretted not standing up to him more ever since. Maya turned toward the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. Her reflection stared back at her, hollow-eyed, exhausted, caught between anger and something she didn't want to name. Why should I believe you? Because I have the documents to prove it. Every email, every meeting transcript where I argued against the hostile takeover, every alternative proposal I submitted. His voice softened. And because you saved my life even though you had every reason to let me die. The baby kicked sharply, making Maya gasp. She pressed both hands to her stomach, feeling the flutter of tiny limbs against her palms. Are you okay? Ethan was trying to get out of bed, his concern overriding his own weakness. Stay put. Maya's command was sharp, but she felt something shift inside her chest. I need air. She headed for the door, then paused without turning around. My father never told me about the money, about any of it. Proud men rarely admit when they've been beaten, even when their opponent tried to lose. Maya felt tears threatening and pushed through the door before they could fall. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall and closed her eyes, feeling her entire world tilt on its axis once again. The storm had passed, leaving behind a crystalline morning that made everything look freshly washed. Maya stood at the kitchen window of the safe house, watching droplets slide down the glass like tears. Her hand rested on her belly, feeling the gentle flutter of movement within. The baby seemed restless today, as if sensing the tension that crackled through the air. Behind her, she could hear the low murmur of voices as Ethan spoke with Detective Chen. They'd arrived an hour ago with news that made Maya's blood run cold. Victor Kozlov wasn't just after Ethan. He'd been systematically destroying anyone connected to their investigation. 3 witnesses had already disappeared, and now Maya's name was on his list. We need to move you again, Chen was saying. This location may be compromised. Maya turned, studying Ethan's face. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and she could see the weight of guilt pressing down on his shoulders. He blamed himself for dragging her into this nightmare, though they both knew the moment she'd pulled him from that lake, their fates had become intertwined. "Where would we go?" Ethan asked. "He seems to find us everywhere." "There's a federal facility in Montana, remote, heavily secured." Chen's voice carried the weariness of someone who'd fought this battle before. "But we'd need to leave within the hour." Montana. The word hung in the air like a prison sentence. Maya thought of her small apartment, her motorcycle, the life she'd been building one careful piece at a time. All of it would have to be abandoned now, sacrificed on the altar of Ethan's past mistakes. "Maya." Ethan's voice was soft, uncertain. "I know this isn't what you signed up for when I saved your life." She met his gaze, seeing the storm of emotions there. Guilt, yes, but something else too, something that made her heart race despite everything. "You're right. I thought I was just preventing someone from drowning. I didn't expect to fall in love with them." The admission slipped out before she could stop it, hanging between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. Chen cleared his throat and stepped outside, giving them privacy they desperately needed but weren't sure they could handle. Ethan moved toward her slowly, as if approaching a wild animal that might bolt. "Maya, Don't." She held up a hand. "Don't you dare apologize for my feelings, and don't you dare tell me this is impossible because of who you are and what you've done." "But it is impossible." His voice cracked. "You lost everything because of my company, your father's shop, your family's legacy. How can you even look at me without hatred?" Maya studied his face, seeing past the expensive bone structure to the broken man beneath. "Because hatred is exhausting, Ethan, and because the man who destroyed my family's business isn't the same man standing here now." "How can you be so sure?" "Because that man wouldn't have risked his life to expose Kozlov. That man wouldn't be planning to give away his entire fortune to make amends. That man wouldn't look at me the way you're looking at me right now." Ethan's hand rose to cup her face, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheek. "I love you too," he whispered. "God help me. I love you and this baby, and I know I have no right to either." The baby kicked hard at that moment, as if responding to his voice. Maya caught his hand and pressed it to her belly, watching wonder spread across his features as he felt the movement. "She likes you," Maya said softly. "She? Just a feeling." Maya covered his hand with both of hers. "Ethan, I need you to promise me something. Anything. If something happens to me, if Kozlov, nothing will happen to you." His voice turned fierce. "I won't let it. You can't control everything. Promise me you'll make sure she's safe, that she grows up knowing she was loved." Ethan pulled her against him, his arms wrapping around her with desperate tenderness. "We're going to get through this, all three of us. I'm not losing you, Maya, not when I just found you." The sound of tires on gravel broke the moment. Chen burst back through the door, his hand on his weapon. "We need to go, now." 3 black SUVs just turned onto the access road. Maya's blood turned to ice. Somehow, impossibly, Kozlov had found them again. Ethan was already moving, grabbing the emergency bag they'd prepared, his face set in grim determination. "The back exit," Chen ordered. But even as he spoke, they could hear the rumble of engines surrounding the house. Maya's hand went to her belly protectively as the reality hit her. They were trapped, with nowhere left to run. The final confrontation she'd been dreading was about to begin, and everything they'd built together hung in the balance. The rain hammered against the cabin windows like accusations Maya couldn't escape. She sat curled in the oversized armchair, watching water streak down the glass while Marcus moved quietly around the kitchen, preparing tea with the careful precision of someone trying not to disturb a fragile peace. 3 days had passed since his confession, and the silence between them had grown thick as fog. Maya's hand rested protectively over her belly, where the baby seemed to sense her turmoil with increasingly restless movements. Every kick reminded her of the impossible situation she'd stumbled into, carrying new life while confronting the architect of her family's destruction. "Your father was brilliant," Marcus said suddenly, his voice cutting through the quiet. Maya's head snapped up to find him standing in the doorway, two steaming mugs in his hands. I read every article he published, studied his research methodology. When I decided to enter the sustainable energy market, his work was my blueprint. Maya's throat tightened. Don't! He would have changed everything, Maya. Solar technology 15 years ahead of what anyone else was developing. Clean, efficient, scalable. Marcus set one mug on the side table next to her, his movements careful and deliberate. I told myself I was saving his innovations from bankruptcy court, that someone had to carry his vision forward. By stealing it, the words came out flat, emotionless. By buying it for pennies on the dollar from creditors who saw it as worthless tech from a failed company. Marcus settled into the chair across from her, his dark eyes haunted. I convinced myself the patents would just gather dust otherwise, that at least this way his work would matter. Maya stared at him, seeing the billionaire who'd built an empire and the broken man who'd nearly drowned trying to escape his ghosts. Did you ever think about us? About what happened to his family when everything fell apart? The question hit him like a physical blow. Marcus set down his untouched tea, his hands trembling slightly. I tried not to. It was easier to focus on the technology, the potential market impact, the business case. Numbers don't have faces or families or dreams that get destroyed. Maya's voice cracked despite her efforts to stay controlled. I hired a firm to research what happened to David Chen's survivors. The admission came out in a rush, as if he'd been holding it back for years. 3 years ago, when the guilt started eating me alive, I found out about your mother's breakdown, her death, about you dropping out of MIT to work 3 jobs just to survive. Maya felt the blood drain from her face. You've been watching me? No. God, no. I read the report once and destroyed it. I couldn't. I didn't want to make it worse by inserting myself into your life. What right did I have? Marcus leaned forward, his voice thick with regret. I set up a foundation, started funding scholarships for engineering students from disadvantaged backgrounds, anonymous donations to mental health programs. I told myself it was penance, but it was just cowardice. The baby kicked hard against Maya's ribs, and she winced, shifting in the chair. Marcus was immediately alert, half rising as if to help before catching himself. I'm fine, she said, but her voice was strained. When is your next appointment? Next week. Maya closed her eyes, exhaustion washing over her. If we ever get out of this weather. Maya. Marcus's voice was soft, careful. I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but please, let me help with the medical bills at least. Let me do something that isn't completely selfish. She opened her eyes to find him watching her with desperate hope, and the sight made her chest ache. You think money fixes this? No, nothing fixes this. But maybe it's a start. The wind howled around the cabin, rattling the windows and making the lights flicker. Maya thought about her tiny apartment, the stack of unpaid bills, the fear that kept her awake at night wondering how she'd manage alone with a baby. She thought about her father, working late into the night in his cluttered garage workshop, explaining solar cell efficiency with the passion of someone who believed technology could save the world. He used to say that energy was just potential waiting to be transformed, she said quietly. That everything broken could be rebuilt into something better if you understood the underlying principles. Marcus went very still. Do you believe that? Maya's hand moved in slow circles over her belly, feeling the life growing inside her, a future that belonged to neither the past's pain nor its mistakes, but to something entirely new. I don't know. I want to, but I don't know if I'm strong enough. You saved my life, Marcus said, his voice rough with emotion. You could have let me drown, and no one would have blamed you. If that's not strength, what is? Outside, thunder rolled across the mountains like a promise of storms yet to come. The hospital room felt smaller with each passing hour, the white walls closing in as Maya sat beside Ethan's bed, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest. 3 days had passed since he'd awakened, and still she couldn't bring herself to leave. Her hand rested on her rounded belly, feeling the baby's restless movements that seemed to mirror her own internal turmoil. "You don't have to stay," Ethan whispered, his voice still hoarse from the breathing tube they'd removed yesterday. "I know this must be difficult for you." Maya turned to meet his eyes, those same piercing blue eyes she'd seen in newspaper articles and business magazines, the ones that had haunted her family's final days at the restaurant. But now they held something different. Vulnerability, genuine remorse. "I keep thinking about what you said," she replied softly, "about not knowing what it would mean to real people." Ethan shifted carefully, wincing as the movement pulled at his stitches. "I've spent the last 3 days trying to remember everything about that time. The acquisition of the Morrison building wasn't even on my radar as significant. My team handled it, brought me papers to sign." He paused, his gaze falling to his hands. "That's not an excuse. It's just the truth of how disconnected I was. My father cried the day we had to close," Maya said, surprising herself with the admission. 43 years he'd been cooking, and I watched him pack up his knives like he was burying pieces of himself. The machines around them hummed quietly, marking time that felt both endless and precious. Maya could feel the weight of the choice before her. The lawyers her brother had hired were still waiting for her call, ready to pursue the wrongful death lawsuit that could destroy what remained of Ethan's reputation and fortune. "What was the restaurant like?" Ethan asked. Maya's eyes softened at the memory. Cozy, warm, the kind of place where regulars had their own tables and Dad knew everyone's favorite dish. Mom did the books and charmed the customers. They met there, you know. She was a food critic for the local paper, came in to review us and never left. "They sound wonderful." They were. Maya's voice caught slightly. "They would have loved this baby. Mom always said she couldn't wait to teach her grandchildren to make her famous tiramisu." Ethan was quiet for a long moment, processing the weight of what his business decisions had cost, not just the restaurant, but the dreams and legacy tied to it. When he spoke again, his words were barely audible. "I can't undo what happened, but I need you to know that if I could trade places with them, if I could be the one who died instead—" "Don't." Maya's voice was sharp. "Don't say that." "Why not?" "It's true." Maya stood abruptly, pacing to the window where the city sprawled below them, a maze of buildings and businesses, each representing someone's livelihood, someone's dreams. "Because I pulled you out of that water for a reason. Because maybe this isn't about justice or revenge. Maybe it's about something else entirely." She turned back to face him, and Ethan saw something in her expression that made his breath catch. Not forgiveness exactly, but possibility. "I've been angry for so long," Maya continued. "It's exhausting. And this baby—" She placed both hands on her belly. "I don't want her growing up in the shadow of that anger." "Her?" A small smile crossed Maya's face. "Found out yesterday. The doctor wanted to make sure everything was okay after the stress of the accident." Ethan felt an unexpected surge of emotion at the simple announcement. This woman, who had every reason to hate him, was sharing one of life's most precious moments. The trust implicit in that gesture wasn't lost on him. "Maya," he said carefully, "what can I do? There has to be something." She returned to the chair beside his bed, studying his face with an intensity that made him feel exposed, vulnerable in ways that had nothing to do with his physical injuries. "I've been thinking about that too," she said finally. "Maybe it's not about what you can do for me. Maybe it's about what we can do together. I don't understand." Maya leaned forward slightly, her eyes bright with an idea that was still forming. "You say you were disconnected from the real impact of your business decisions. What if that could change? What if there was a way to make sure other families didn't lose what mine lost?" Ethan's heart began to beat faster, though whether from hope or fear, he couldn't tell. "What are you proposing?" "I don't know yet, but I think we're going to figure it out together." She stood again, gathering her purse. "I need to go home, get some rest. But I'll be back tomorrow." As she reached the door, Ethan called out softly, "Maya?" She turned back. "Thank you. For saving me. For staying. For—" He gestured helplessly. unable to find words for the transformation happening between them. "Don't thank me yet," she replied with a mysterious smile. "We still have work to do." The hospital corridor stretched endlessly before Maya, her footsteps echoing against sterile walls as she made her way to the elevators. 3 days had passed since she'd walked away from Adrian's penthouse, 3 days of sleepless nights and a gnawing emptiness that seemed to grow stronger with each passing hour. Her hand rested protectively over her belly where their child continued to grow, oblivious to the chaos surrounding its existence. She shouldn't be here. Every rational part of her mind screamed that coming to see Adrian was a mistake, that she was only prolonging an inevitable goodbye. But the call from his assistant had shattered her resolve completely. Adrian was in the hospital, unconscious, and somehow she was still listed as his emergency contact. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, and Maya stepped inside, her heart hammering against her ribs. She'd rehearsed what she would say, how she would maintain her distance, but all her carefully constructed walls crumbled the moment she saw him through the glass partition of the ICU. Adrian lay motionless in the hospital bed, his face pale against the white pillows, machines monitoring his every breath. The man who had once commanded boardrooms and built empires looked fragile, vulnerable in a way that made her chest tighten with an emotion she didn't want to name. "Are you family?" A nurse appeared beside her, chart in hand, eyes kind but professional. Maya hesitated, the question hitting deeper than it should have. I'm the emergency contact. What happened?" "Severe exhaustion and dehydration. His assistant found him collapsed in his office this morning. The doctor said it looks like he hasn't been sleeping or eating properly for days." The nurse's expression softened slightly. "He's been asking for someone named Maya when he drifts in and out of consciousness." The words hit her like a physical blow, and Maya had to steady herself against the wall. She'd thought walking away would protect them both, would give them space to heal separately. Instead, it seemed she'd only caused more damage. "Can I see him?" The nurse nodded, leading her into the room. The steady beep of monitors filled the silence, and Maya found herself drawn to his bedside despite every instinct telling her to run. Up close, she could see the dark circles under his eyes, the way his hands lay still against the white sheets, no longer animated by the passionate gestures she remembered. "You're an idiot," she whispered, settling into the chair beside his bed. A brilliant, stubborn, self-destructive idiot. As if summoned by her voice, Adrian's eyelids fluttered open, confusion clouding his features before his gaze found hers. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between them like a bridge neither dared to cross. "You came," he said finally, his voice hoarse and barely above a whisper. "Your assistant called." She was worried. Maya kept her tone neutral, though her hands trembled slightly in her lap. "What were you thinking, Adrian? Working yourself into the ground won't change anything." He tried to sit up, wincing at the effort. "I was trying to fix things, the contracts, the legal issues with your family's company. I thought if I could just—" "Stop." The word came out sharper than she intended. "You can't fix this by destroying yourself." Adrian's laugh was bitter, hollow. "Then how? Tell me how to fix what I've broken, because I've tried everything else." Maya stared at him, seeing past the corporate facade to the man underneath, the one who'd held her during thunderstorms, who Dee talked about his fears of becoming his father, who'd looked at ultrasound images with wonder and terror in equal measure, the man she'd fallen in love with, despite every reason not to. "Maybe some things can't be fixed," she said quietly. "Maybe they can only be rebuilt from the ground up." Something shifted in Adrian's expression, hope flickering to life in his eyes. "Then tell me how to rebuild. Tell me what you need." "I need time," Maya said, the words coming from a place of honesty she'd been afraid to access. "I need to know that you're choosing us, not just trying to assuage your guilt, and I need to know that you won't disappear into your work the moment things get difficult." Adrian reached for her hand, his fingers barely brushing hers. "I choose you, Maya. I choose our child. I choose whatever family we can build together, however broken or complicated it might be. Maya felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, her carefully constructed defenses finally beginning to crack. And my father's company? The people whose lives were destroyed? We'll find a way to make it right, together. His grip tightened slightly, anchoring them both. But not at the cost of our future. For the first time in days, Maya allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, love could be enough to bridge the gap between destruction and healing. The sound of gravel crunching under tires made Maya's heart skip. She peered through the cabin's front window, her hand instinctively moving to her rounded belly as an unmarked black sedan pulled into the clearing. This wasn't one of Ethan's usual security vehicles. Two men in dark suits emerged, their movements deliberate and predatory. Maya recognized the type immediately. Corporate enforcers, the kind who cleaned up messes that couldn't be handled through legal channels. "Ethan," she called softly, not wanting to alarm him, but needing him to see what she was seeing. He appeared beside her at the window, his face hardening as he took in the scene. "Blackwood's men," he confirmed grimly. "He found us faster than I expected." The knock on the door came moments later, 3 sharp raps that seemed to echo with authority and threat. Maya felt the baby shift restlessly inside her, as if sensing the tension that suddenly filled the small space. "Dr. Chen," came a voice from outside, smooth and professional. "We know you're in there. We'd like to have a word." Ethan stepped protectively in front of Maya, his jaw set. "Stay behind me," he whispered, then raised his voice. "Whatever Blackwood is paying you, I'll double it." A low chuckle filtered through the door. "This isn't about money, Mr. Cross. This is about justice. Dr. Chen has something that belongs to our employer." Maya's blood ran cold. They weren't here for Ethan. They were here for her. The flash drive with Dr. Morrison's research, the evidence that could bring down Blackwood's entire pharmaceutical empire, was hidden in her motorcycle's saddlebag just outside. "I don't know what you're talking about," she called out, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "The research data from Whitmore Medical. Dr. Morrison was very specific about what he gave you before his unfortunate accident." The emphasis on accident made Maya's skin crawl. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way, Doctor." Ethan's hand found hers, squeezing tightly. In his eyes, she saw a mixture of determination and fear, not for himself, but for her and their unborn child. The man who had once seemed so untouchable now looked vulnerable, human in a way that made her chest ache. "There's a back window," he murmured against her ear. "I can create a distraction." "No." Maya's voice was firm. "I'm tired of running." She looked at him intently. "But I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" Before he could answer, she was moving toward the door. Ethan caught her arm, his eyes wide with panic. "Maya, what are you doing?" "Something I should have done a long time ago." She placed her hand over his, feeling the tremor in his fingers. "I'm taking control of my own story." She opened the door slowly, keeping her hands visible. The two men stood on the small porch, their expressions professionally neutral despite the remote setting. The taller one, with silver threading through his dark hair, smiled without warmth. "Dr. Chen, thank you for being reasonable. This doesn't have to be complicated." "You're right," Maya said, stepping fully into the doorway. "It doesn't. Because I don't have what you're looking for." The man's smile faltered slightly. "I think you're mistaken." "No, I'm not." Maya's voice grew stronger. "Because this morning I uploaded everything to multiple news outlets, medical journals, and regulatory agencies. By now your Mr. Blackwood's lawyers are probably fielding calls from federal investigators." It was a bluff, a complete fabrication, but Maya delivered it with such conviction that she saw doubt creep into both men's eyes. Behind her, she felt Ethan's sharp intake of breath. "You're lying," the second man said, but his hand moved unconsciously toward his jacket. "Am I? Check your phone. I'm betting Blackwood's been trying to reach you for the last hour." Maya stepped closer, her fear transforming into something fiercer. "You see, when someone tries to kill the father of my child, when they threaten my family, I stop playing defense." The men exchanged glances, and Maya saw the moment her bluff found its mark. The silver-haired man pulled out his phone, and she caught a glimpse of multiple missed calls on his screen. "This isn't over," he said, but he was already backing away. "Yes, it is." Maya's voice carried a finality that surprised even her. "Tell Blackwood that if anything happens to me, to Ethan, or to our baby, that information goes public immediately. And tell him that Dr. Morrison's accident is included in those files." The men retreated to their car without another word, gravel spraying as they accelerated away. Maya stood in the doorway until their taillights disappeared, adrenaline keeping her upright. Only when Ethan's arms wrapped around her from behind did she allow herself to tremble. "That was either the bravest or most reckless thing I've ever seen," he whispered against her hair. Maya leaned back against his chest, feeling their baby move between them. "Maybe both," she admitted, "but I meant what I said. This ends now." The storm had passed, leaving behind a crystalline morning that made everything look newly born. Maya stood at the kitchen window of the safe house, watching droplets catch the early sunlight like scattered diamonds on the glass. Her hand rested protectively over her belly, where their daughter had been unusually active since dawn, as if sensing the tension that crackled through the air. 3 days had passed since Victor's arrest, 3 days of depositions and phone calls from prosecutors who spoke in careful legal language about justice and closure. But Maya felt neither. Instead, there was an emptiness where her anger used to live, a hollow space that she didn't quite know how to fill. Behind her, she heard the soft shuffle of bare feet on hardwood. Ethan's arms encircled her from behind, his chin finding its familiar place on her shoulder. She could feel the exhaustion in his embrace, the weight of everything they'd endured together. "The DA called," he murmured against her ear. "Victor's pleading guilty to everything: conspiracy, attempted murder, fraud. His lawyers are negotiating for life without parole instead of the death penalty." Maya nodded, unsurprised. Victor Chen had always been pragmatic above all else. "And the others?" "Morrison's already talking. They've frozen accounts in 6 countries, recovered about 60% of what was stolen from the pension funds." His voice carried a note of satisfaction. "Including what was taken from your family's business." She turned in his arms, studying his face. The bruises had faded, but there were new lines around his eyes, a gravity that hadn't been there before. "You could rebuild the empire, you know. Start over with a clean slate." Ethan was quiet for a long moment, his gaze drifting past her to the garden beyond the window. "I keep thinking about something my father told me when I was 12. He'd just closed a deal that put 300 people out of work, and I asked him how he could sleep at night. He said that empathy was a luxury that successful men couldn't afford. And now? Now I think he was wrong about everything that mattered." He cupped her face in his hands, thumbs tracing the curve of her cheekbones. "I don't want to rebuild an empire, Maya. I want to build something real, something that matters." Through the kitchen doorway, Maya could see boxes stacked in the living room, her belongings from the apartment, his from the penthouse, everything they'd salvaged from their old lives waiting to be sorted into their new one. Detective Rodriguez had cleared them to return to the city yesterday, but neither had been ready to leave this quiet sanctuary just yet. "The shop insurance came through," Maya said softly. "Enough to rebuild twice over if I want to." "Do you?" She considered this, watching a sparrow land on the windowsill outside. Such a small thing, she thought, how one moment of choice by the river had led them here. "I keep thinking about that first day, when you asked me why I stopped, why I pulled you out of the water instead of just driving away. You said it was instinct. I lied." The admission surprised her with its simplicity. "I stopped because I saw something in your eyes in that split second before you went under. Fear, yes, but also regret, like you were carrying something too heavy to bear alone." Ethan's hands stilled against her skin. "And now I think maybe we all need saving sometimes. Maybe that's what love really is, Not the fairy tale version, but the real thing. Choosing to pull someone out of the dark water, even when you don't know if you're strong enough to swim for both of you. Their daughter kicked then, a sharp jab against Maya's ribs that made her gasp and laugh at the same time. Ethan's hands moved to her belly, his expression shifting into something like wonder as he felt their child's movements beneath his palms. "She's going to be a fighter," he said, and there was such tenderness in his voice that Maya felt her throat tighten. "She'll have to be, with parents like us." Outside, the sparrow took flight, disappearing into the vast blue of the morning sky. Maya watched it go and thought about second chances, about the strange alchemy that could transform destruction into creation, hatred into something deeper and more durable. The phone rang. Rodriguez probably, or one of the lawyers, or another reporter who'd somehow tracked them down despite all the security measures. But neither of them moved to answer it. Instead, they stood there in the kitchen filled with golden light, feeling their daughter move between them like a promise that some stories, against all odds, could still have happy endings. Maya closed her eyes and let herself imagine it, a small shop somewhere, the smell of motor oil and possibility, Ethan's laugh mixing with a child's laughter in the apartment above. Not an empire, but something better, something real, something worth saving. The hospital room felt smaller with Marcus standing by the window, his shoulders rigid against the morning light. Elena watched him from her bed, her hand instinctively moving to her belly where their daughter kicked restlessly, as if sensing the tension crackling between her parents. "The board meeting is in 2 hours, Marcus said without turning around. "They're going to vote on whether to remove me as CEO. Elena's breath caught. "Because of us? Because of what happened with my father's company? Because Victor leaked everything, the acquisition, our relationship, the timing of it all." His voice was hollow. He's painted it as a massive conflict of interest. Says I've compromised the company's integrity. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Victor Hawthorne, the man who'd orchestrated her father's downfall with ruthless precision, now positioning himself as the moral compass of Hawthorne Industries. Maybe, Elena's voice was barely a whisper, maybe it's better this way. Marcus finally turned, his eyes searching her face. "You think I should step down?" "I think you've been carrying the weight of your father's sins for too long." She shifted in the bed, wincing slightly. "Maybe it's time to build something new, something that's truly yours." Before Marcus could respond, a door burst open. Sarah rushed in, her face flushed with urgency, clutching her phone. "Don't go to that meeting," she said, breathless. "I found something. About the night your father died." Marcus went very still. "Sarah, we've been over this." "No, listen." She pulled up a video on her phone. Security footage from the parking garage across from the hotel. "I've been working with a private investigator for months. Look at the timestamp." The grainy footage showed 2 figures on the hotel balcony. Even from this distance, Victor's distinctive silhouette was unmistakable. The timestamp read 11:47 p.m., 13 minutes before the official time of death. "Victor told the police he found your father's body at 12:15, Sarah continued, "but he was up there with him when he was still alive. They were arguing." Elena felt the blood drain from her face as the implications hit her. Marcus stared at the screen, his jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. "There's more." Sarah swiped to another file. "Financial records I managed to access. Your father had been liquidating assets for weeks before he died, not to cover losses, to set up a trust fund. For you, Marcus. He was trying to make things right." The silence stretched between them, heavy with years of misplaced guilt and buried truth. Elena reached for Marcus's hand, finding it cold and trembling. "He didn't jump," Marcus whispered. "He was planning to live. The investigator thinks Victor pushed him, or at least didn't try to save him when he fell." Sarah's voice was gentle but firm. "Your father was trying to expose the illegal practices Victor had been hiding. That's why he was taking apart the company. He was gathering evidence." Elena's heart shattered watching Marcus process this revelation. The man who'd spent years believing his father was a coward, that he'd abandoned his family rather than face the consequences of his actions, now learning the devastating truth. "We have to take this to the police," Elena said. "We will." Marcus's voice was stronger now, purpose replacing the hollow despair. "But first, I have a board meeting to attend." An hour later, Elena insisted on being discharged despite the doctor's protests. She needed to be there, needed to stand beside Marcus as he faced down the man who'd destroyed both their families. The Hawthorne Industries boardroom was packed, tension thick as smoke. Victor sat at the head of the table, supremely confident, already occupying the CEO's chair as if the vote was a mere formality. "Gentlemen," Victor began as Marcus entered, "I think we can all agree that recent events have shown that you're a murderer." Marcus's words cut through the room like a blade. He set the laptop on the conference table, the security footage already queued up. Victor's composure cracked, just for a moment, but Elena caught it from where she stood in the doorway. Guilt and panic flashing across his features before the mask slipped back into place. "This is desperate, even for you," Victor said, but his voice lacked its usual authority. The room fell silent as the footage played. 13 minutes that changed everything. When it ended, Marcus looked around the table at the stunned faces of the board members. "My father died trying to save this company from the corruption that's been rotting it from the inside. He wasn't running from his responsibilities. He was running toward them." Elena watched Victor's carefully constructed world begin to crumble, saw the moment he realized his game was finally over, but instead of satisfaction, she felt only exhaustion. Too much pain, too much loss, all for one man's greed and ambition. The truth was finally free, but healing would take much longer. The helicopter blades cut through the dawn air as Maya gripped the medical gurney, her knuckles white against the metal rails. Alexander's face was pale beneath the oxygen mask, his breathing shallow and labored. The paramedic across from her worked frantically, adjusting 4 drips and monitoring vitals that seemed to fluctuate with each passing second. "Blood pressure's dropping," the paramedic shouted over the rotor noise. "We need to get him into surgery immediately." Maya's hand instinctively moved to her belly, feeling the gentle flutter of movement within. Her baby, their baby, responding to the chaos surrounding them. She hadn't told Alexander yet. There hadn't been time before Marcus Blackwood's men found them at the safe house, before the gunfire that left Alexander bleeding out on the warehouse floor. The city sprawled beneath them as they approached the hospital, morning light casting long shadows across the buildings. Maya thought about the choice she'd made weeks ago when she first pulled Alexander from the lake. She could have let him drown then, let the water claim the man who had destroyed everything her family had built. Instead, she'd saved him. And in doing so, she'd saved herself. "There," she whispered, though her words were lost in the helicopter's din. "That's where it all began." The lake glittered in the distance, serene and deceptive. It seemed impossible that so much had changed since that night, when her motorcycle had skidded to a halt on the bridge, when she'd seen a figure struggling in the dark water below. She'd been angry then, consumed by grief and rage over her father's suicide, her mother's breakdown, the empire that Alexander's corporate machinations had reduced to rubble. Now she understood the truth. Marcus Blackwood had orchestrated it all, using his own nephew as an unwitting weapon. Alexander had been as much a victim as her family, manipulated by a man whose hunger for power knew no bounds. The evidence they'd gathered would expose everything if Alexander survived to help her use it. The helicopter touched down on the hospital's rooftop helipad, and immediately they were surrounded by medical personnel. Maya watched as they transferred Alexander to a waiting gurney, his hand slipping from hers as they rushed him toward the elevator. "Ma'am, you need to be examined too," a nurse said, noticing the blood on Maya's clothes. "Some hers, some Alexander's. You've been through trauma." "I'm fine," Maya insisted, but she allowed herself to be led inside. Her mind was racing, calculating what came next. Marcus Blackwood was still out there, still dangerous. The evidence they'd collected was hidden, but without Alexander's testimony, would it be enough to bring him down? In the emergency room, Maya submitted to examination, while Alexander was wheeled into surgery. The bullet had missed his heart by inches, the surgeon explained, but there was internal bleeding, possible organ damage. The next few hours would be critical. Maya sat in the surgical waiting room, her phone buzzing constantly. Detective Rodriguez needed her statement. Reporters were already sniffing around the story. Alexander's legitimate business associates were demanding answers, but she ignored them all, focused instead on the life growing inside her. She'd known for certain 3 days ago, though she'd suspected for weeks. The timing was impossible, the circumstances chaotic, but somehow this child felt like hope incarnate, a chance for something pure to emerge from all the darkness and deception. Maya Chen? She looked up to see a tall woman in an expensive suit approaching. There was something familiar about her features, the same strong jawline that Alexander possessed. "I'm Victoria Hayes, Alexander's sister," the woman said. "I came as soon as I heard." Maya had heard about Victoria, the sister who'd distanced herself from the family business years ago, who'd built her own empire in renewable energy. They'd never met, but Alexander spoke of her with admiration and regret. "He's still in surgery," Maya said simply. Victoria sat beside her, studying Maya's face intently. "You're the one who saved him, from the lake and from himself. We saved each other." "Marcus called me this morning," Victoria said quietly. "He wanted to know if I'd heard from Alexander. He sounded worried, but not the right kind of worried. More like a man whose carefully laid plans were unraveling." Maya met her gaze. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing. I haven't spoken to my uncle in 5 years, and I told him that wouldn't be changing." Victoria paused. "But I need you to know, whatever Alexander discovered about Marcus, whatever evidence you've gathered, you have allies, resources. You don't have to face this alone." Before Maya could respond, the surgical doors opened. The doctor emerged, still in his scrubs, his expression unreadable. Maya rose slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. Everything, their future, their child's future, the possibility of justice, hung in the balance of whatever words came next. The hospital room filled with a soft morning light as Maya adjusted the baby carrier against her chest. 3-month-old Emma slept peacefully, her tiny fist curled around Maya's finger. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was back in the same place where her journey with Lucas had truly begun, but everything had changed. Lucas stood by the window, his reflection ghost-like in the glass as he watched the city wake up below. The past months had transformed him. Gone was the cold, calculating businessman she'd first pulled from the lake. In his place stood someone she was still learning to know, vulnerable, determined, and completely devoted to making amends. "The settlement papers are ready," he said quietly, not turning around. "Your father's business will be fully restored, with interest. The patents returned, the reputation cleared. Everything." Maya had expected to feel triumph at this moment, but instead she felt only a hollow ache. That won't bring back the years he lost, the pride that was stripped away. "No," Lucas agreed, finally facing her. "But it's a beginning." Emma stirred, making the soft mewling sounds that meant she'd wake soon. Maya had learned to read every nuance of her daughter's needs, just as she'd learned to read the guilt that still haunted Lucas's eyes, despite everything he'd done to make things right. "My father wants to meet you," Maya said, the words hanging between them like a bridge neither was sure they could cross. Lucas's jaw tightened. "I'm not sure I'm ready for that conversation." "Are any of us ready for the hard conversations? I wasn't ready to save you that day, wasn't ready to discover who you were, wasn't ready to fall in love with the man who destroyed my family." She paused, her voice growing stronger. "But sometimes the things we're not ready for are exactly what we need." Through the window, Maya could see the lake in the distance, its surface sparkling like scattered diamonds. It seemed impossible that such a peaceful place had been the scene of such chaos, the catalyst for everything that followed. "I've been thinking about that night," Lucas said, following her gaze. "About the choice you made to save me instead of letting me drown. You could have walked away. Part of you wanted to." Maya shifted Emma to her other arm, remembering the weight of that moment, the person I would have become if I'd left you there. I couldn't live with her. And now? Can you live with this version of yourself? The one who chose forgiveness over revenge? It was the question that had kept Maya awake for weeks. Forgiveness wasn't a single decision but a daily choice, complicated by Emma's presence, by the reality of building something new from the ashes of old wounds. Emma's eyes fluttered open, deep blue like her father's, and Maya felt the familiar rush of fierce protectiveness. This little girl would grow up in a world shaped by the choices they made today. I keep thinking about the motorcycles, Maya said suddenly. How my dad taught me that they're not just machines. They're about freedom, about choosing your own path, even when the road is dangerous. Lucas moved closer, drawn by the sound of Emma beginning to fuss. Without thinking, he reached out, his finger brushing against the baby's cheek. The gesture was so gentle, so natural, that Maya's breath caught. What if we choose a different road entirely? He asked. Not the one where I'm trying to atone forever, or where you're trying to forgive the unforgivable. What if we choose the road where we're just us? Maya looked at him, really looked. The scar on his temple from the accident had faded but not disappeared, a permanent reminder of how their lives had collided. But there were other changes too, laugh lines that hadn't been there before, a softness in his expression when he looked at Emma, calloused hands from the months he'd spent working alongside her father's restoration team instead of hiding behind lawyers and corporate intermediaries. The road where we're just us, she repeated. What does that look like? I don't know, he admitted. But I want to find out, if you'll let me. Emma began to cry, the sound sharp in the quiet room. Maya started to rock her, but Lucas held out his arms. After a moment's hesitation, Maya transferred their daughter to him. She watched as he held Emma against his chest, murmuring soft words until the crying stopped. In that moment, Maya saw their future, not perfect, not without struggle, but real. A family built on choice rather than chance, on forgiveness earned rather than demanded. The settlement papers, she said, I want you to deliver them personally, to my father, to face what you did and who you've become. Lucas nodded, still holding Emma. And after? Maya smiled, feeling lighter than she had in months. After, we take the long way home, all of us, together. Outside, the lake sparkled in the morning sun, no longer a place of endings but of new beginnings.